At exactly 20:17 a.m., Detective Alina Cross received a voicemail that should not have existed. The timestamp was current. The voice was unmistakably her own, and the message ended with a sentence she had never spoken out loud, yet somehow already knew. If you're listening to this, Alana, it means you didn't stop him in time. If you're drawn to dark investigations, unsolved mysteries, and the quiet psychology behind crimes that refuse to stay buried, subscribe to Midnight Casefiles. New stories unfold slowly, piece by piece, because the truth never reveals itself all at once. Detective Alina Cross had learned to live with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, buzzing silence that crept in after midnight, when the city stopped pretending it was safe and showed its real face. She had spent 14 years working homicide, long enough to recognize that the worst crimes didn't scream. They waited. They lingered. They left echoes. Her apartment overlooked a narrow street in the older part of the city. Streetlights flickered inconsistently, painting the pavement in tired amber tones. The building across from her had been condemned years ago, yet someone always seemed to leave a light on in one of the upper floors. Alina had stopped wondering who. She sat at her kitchen table, badge tossed beside a half-cold mug of coffee, boots still on. The digital clock on the microwave glowed 20:19 a.m. 2 minutes had passed since the voicemail. She hadn't played it again. Alina wasn't afraid of much anymore. Fear had a way of burning itself out after you'd seen enough blood, enough grief, enough families shattered by one phone call. But this was different. This wasn't a threat. It wasn't a taunt. It was familiarity weaponized. She finally picked up her phone, thumb hovering. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark screen. Sharp eyes, hair pulled into a loose knot, a faint scar tracing her jawline from an old case she rarely spoke about. She looked tired. Older than her 41 years. She pressed play. Her own voice filled the quiet kitchen. Low. Controlled. Professional. Alina Cross, detective, badge 4172. That was how she introduced herself on recorded statements. Always had. Her chest tightened. If you're listening to this, it means you didn't stop him in time. The message cut off abruptly. No background noise, no distortion. Clean. Intentional. She lowered the phone slowly, every instinct screaming that this wasn't a prank. Pranks were sloppy. This was precise. Alina stood and moved to her workstation near the window, opening her laptop with muscle memory. If someone wanted to scare her, they'd pick the wrong approach. Fear made people reckless. Precision made them careful. She accessed the department voicemail routing logs remotely, an old habit she'd never broken, even after internal affairs warned her more than once about overstepping digital boundaries. The message hadn't come through the department system. It wasn't spoofed from a public exchange either. It had been routed internally, from a number that no longer existed. Her old desk line, the one decommissioned 7 years ago after a case that had quietly ended her partner's career and nearly ended hers. Alina closed her eyes. She hadn't thought about that case in a long time. Not consciously, anyway. The elevator in her building groaned as she rode down to the parking garage. The city air outside felt damp, heavy with the promise of rain. She slid into her unmarked sedan and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. Every detective had ghosts. Most learned to keep them in the rearview mirror. This one had just called her phone. She drove without turning on the radio. The city at night felt different, quieter, but more honest. Neon signs buzzed above shuttered storefronts. A lone pedestrian crossed an intersection far too slowly, as if daring the darkness to make a move. Alina parked near the precinct, bypassing the main entrance and heading straight for records. The night clerk barely looked up. He knew her well enough not to ask questions. The file she requested was thick with dust. Case ID 09417, unofficially known among the few who remembered it as the archivist, a serial offender who never killed. Not directly. People associated with him vanished from their lives. Jobs lost, reputations destroyed, relationships collapsed, until some broke entirely. 2 suicides had been linked circumstantially. No charges ever stuck. Evidence evaporated. Witnesses recanted. And then, nothing. The case was closed due to Lack of actionable leads. Alina had been the one to sign off on that closure. She flipped through the pages now, fingers tracing old notes in her own handwriting. Her stomach tightened as fragments returned. Not memories exactly, but impressions. Obsessive patterns. The sense of being watched, studied. She stopped at a page near the back. An audio transcript. Her pulse quickened. The transcript matched the voicemail word for word, including the sentence she was certain she'd never spoken. If you're listening to this, it means you didn't stop him in time. A note in the margin, written by her younger self. Recording created as contingency. Do not archive. Personal use only. Alina leaned back slowly. She had made the recording, but she had no memory of why. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Alana knew one thing with absolute certainty as she closed the file. This wasn't a cold case waking up. It was a message, sent exactly when she was ready to hear it. And whoever, or whatever, had triggered it knew her better than anyone else alive. Elena Cross left the precinct just before dawn, the sky a dull slate gray that felt undecided about becoming morning. Rain misted the streets lightly, not enough to wash anything clean, just enough to make the city reflective. Mirrors everywhere, truth nowhere. She drove without urgency. After 14 years in homicide, she'd learned that rushing only mattered when the killer wanted you to rush. Whoever had sent the voicemail didn't. They wanted her thinking, remembering. Her phone sat face down in the passenger seat. She hadn't deleted the message. That bothered her more than the message itself. Do at home. Alina set the file on her kitchen table, clearing space with one sweep of her arm. Old notebooks, loose case summaries, a half-read forensic psychology journal, all shoved aside without ceremony. She treated case 09417 with a respect she hadn't given any file in years. The archivist. The nickname had never been official, but it stuck because it fit. The suspect, if that word even applied, had never left fingerprints, never spoken on record, never threatened directly. He collected people instead, not bodies, histories, weaknesses. Alina pulled a legal pad from the drawer and wrote the date at the top. Her handwriting was neat, controlled, the same way she tried to live. Why now? She circled the words once, then again. 7 years of silence didn't break on accident. She reopened the file and started from the beginning, forcing herself to move slowly, not skimming, not jumping ahead. Patterns didn't like impatience. The first reported incident wasn't a crime. It never was. A mid-level city auditor abruptly resigned after anonymous allegations surfaced, fabricated, but convincing. His marriage collapsed within months. No charges filed. Case closed. Second incident, a zoning board official accused of bribery. Evidence planted digitally. Cleared later, but too late to salvage his career. Third, a defense attorney disbarred after private communications were leaked. Each incident isolated, deniable. But Alina had noticed something back then that no one else had wanted to see. Every target had handled information, not secrets. Records. They were archivists in their own way. She flipped to a page marked with a faded yellow tab. Pattern note. EC, he doesn't destroy lives randomly. He edits them. Alina exhaled slowly. She remembered writing that. She remembered the feeling that came with it. The quiet certainty that something was moving beneath the surface, reshaping people without touching them. What she didn't remember was recording the contingency message. Her phone vibrated suddenly, sharp against the stillness of the room. She didn't flinch. That annoyed her. Caller ID unknown. She let it ring. It stopped after exactly 4 rings. No voicemail. She waited, counting her breaths. The phone buzzed again, this time a text. UNKNOBUNs, you always did better reading than listening. Alina stared at the screen, pulse steady but heavy. She didn't respond. She never responded to first contact. That was rule 1. Instead, she stood, walked to the window, and looked across the street. The condemned building was dark, except for one window on the 3rd floor, lit. It hadn't been lit earlier. She didn't grab her weapon. Not yet. This wasn't a confrontation. It was an observation. Whoever was playing this game understood boundaries. They wouldn't cross into violence unless forced. And they wanted her calm. She took out her binoculars. Another habit she'd never explained to anyone, and adjusted the focus. The window was empty. No movement, no silhouette, just light. Her phone vibrated again. UNKM Ubelin still watching the wrong places. That one landed. Elena lowered the binoculars slowly. This wasn't surveillance, it was intimacy. She spent the rest of the morning rebuilding the case the way she should have 7 years ago, outside the department system. Personal drive, offline notes. No timestamps that could be traced easily. She listed every known associate, every professional overlap, every digital artifact that had survived the purge. One name stood out: Martin Hale, a records compliance officer who'd testified briefly during the original investigation. Not as a suspect, as a consultant. He'd explained data retention systems, audit trails, how records could be manipulated without leaving obvious fingerprints. At the time, he'd been helpful, polite, forgettable. That alone should have bothered her more. Elena searched public databases. Martin Hale had died 3 years ago, causing apparent suicide. She stared at the screen longer than necessary. The archivist never killed directly, but consequences counted. She pulled the coroner's report from a cached archive. The language was careful. No note, no prior mental health history. Death ruled self-inflicted due to lack of evidence otherwise. Elena whispered, "You don't disappear people, you finish them." Her phone buzzed again. She didn't look at it. Not immediately. She needed control. When she finally did, the message was a single line. UNKNOWNs. Hale figured it out too late. Elena closed her eyes. There it was. Confirmation, not proof, but something better: recognition. Sir, she showered, changed, and left the apartment without turning on the lights. Habit, no need to advertise routine. She drove to the east side, where the city stopped pretending it cared about appearances. Records storage facilities, decommissioned offices, forgotten municipal buildings, places where paper went to sleep. She parked 2 blocks away and walked. The building she entered wasn't marked, but it smelled like dust and ozone. Old electronics trying to remember their purpose. She still had access clearance here. Barely. No one had bothered revoking it. Inside, rows of shelving disappeared into shadow. Servers hummed softly, a mechanical lullaby. She moved with familiarity, fingers brushing metal edges, eyes adjusting to the dim. "You always did like places no one checks," she said quietly. Her voice echoed just enough to remind her she was alone. Or supposed to be. She found what she was looking for in an auxiliary terminal. An access log anomaly from 7 years ago. Small, almost elegant. A ghost login that appeared, altered a single index pointer, then vanished. Not deletion. Redirection. Someone had buried evidence without destroying it. Elena smiled faintly despite herself. That was him. The archivist didn't erase truth. He hid it in plain sight. Her phone vibrated again. This time she answered. "Stop," she said. A pause. Then a voice, filtered, flattened, genderless. "Still issuing commands you can't enforce. Detective." "You're not here," Elena replied calmly. "You're testing memory. Mine, yours." A soft chuckle. "You remembered that too." "I remember patterns," she said. "People are inconsistent. You aren't." "Careful," the voice replied. "That's how you missed it last time." Silence stretched. Elena filled it. "You wanted me back on the case," she said. "Otherwise you'd have stayed quiet. So here I am." "Yes," the voice said simply. "And this time," Elena's jaw tightened. "This time," she said, "I don't close the file." Another pause. Longer. When the voice returned, it sounded almost pleased. "Good," it said. "Then we can continue where you stopped." Galan muddud na adam odan now Elena stood alone among the shelves, the hum of forgotten systems filling the space around her. She didn't feel fear. She felt alignment. The case hadn't ended 7 years ago. It had been waiting, and she had finally remembered why she'd left herself a message. Elena Cross didn't leave the storage facility immediately. She stood between the rows of shelving long after the call ended, letting the quiet settle back into place. The hum of the servers wasn't comforting. It was patient. Like the building itself knew she would return. That thought bothered her more than the voice. She shut down the auxiliary terminal manually, careful to restore the access state exactly as she'd found it. No anomalies. No ripples. Whoever was watching would expect that much from her. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city smelled like damp concrete and old metal, a scent she associated with late night arrests and unanswered questions. She got into her car and didn't start the engine right away. Instead, she reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a slim black notebook, not department-issued, not logged. She flipped to the first blank page and wrote a single line Rada Irakadion, not Dion. She underlined it twice. 7 years ago, she'd believed the evidence was gone, that the trail had ended because someone smarter, cleaner, had beaten her. That belief had allowed her to sign the closure papers. Now she understood the truth. She hadn't lost the case. She'd been guided away from it. Back at her apartment, Alina laid everything out. Physical notes, digital copies, archived transcripts. She worked standing up, moving between surfaces, refusing to sit long enough for doubt to creep in. She rebuilt the timeline. Not the official one. Her timeline. The redirection event she'd just rediscovered had occurred 48 hours before the case was closed. That mattered. It meant something had shifted late, urgently. She pulled up the index pointer data again, this time mapping where it led. The trail didn't disappear, it bent. To a subfolder buried under obsolete municipal contracts, miscategorized under a defunct infrastructure project. She accessed it slowly. Inside were audio files. Not recordings of crimes. Recordings of conversations. Private ones. Meetings held in places that never officially hosted them. Phone calls routed through analog bridges. Interviews never logged. The archivist's work wasn't chaos. It was curation. Elena opened the first file. A man's voice, tense, low. I told you this wasn't secure. You promised. Another voice interrupted him. Calm, educated. Familiar and structured if not tone. You confuse security with obscurity. People only guard what they believe is valuable. Alina froze the playback. Her heart rate stayed steady. Her mind didn't. That cadence, that phrasing. She'd heard it before. Not recently. In mirrors. She played the file again, listening not to the words but the rhythm. The pauses, the way the speaker allowed silence to do half the work. It wasn't her voice. But it was close enough to make her uncomfortable. She cataloged the file and moved on. The second recording was shorter. A woman this time, breathing unevenly. You said this would stay buried. The response came softly. It will, just not where you expect. The file ended. Elena closed her eyes. The archivist didn't. He refrained. You go. Her phone buzzed. This time she didn't hesitate. What do you want? She asked. To see how far you're willing to go. The voice replied. I'm already here. Yes, it said. But you're still pretending this is about me. Alina said nothing. That's the mistake you made before. The voice continued. You assumed I was the center of the system. I was only the index. You're admitting involvement now, Alina said. A soft sound, almost a laugh. Admitting requires accountability. This is a conversation. Elena leaned against the counter. You redirected evidence, she said. You buried recordings that could have exposed multiple crimes. I preserved them, the voice corrected. Exposure is destructive. Preservation is patient. People died. Alina said flatly. People broke. The voice replied. There's a difference. You know that. That one hit closer than she liked. You didn't kill Hale, she said. No, the voice agreed. But I made sure he finally understood the full archive of his decisions. Silence followed. Then, quieter. Some people can't live with complete records. Alina ended the call, not out of fear, out of clarity. Instead, she pulled the original case photos from cold storage. Not to look at them, but to check their metadata. She'd learned long ago that the truth often hid in what no one thought to scrub. One file caught her attention. An evidence intake photo timestamped 12 minutes earlier than it should have been. That shouldn't have been possible. She cross-referenced shift logs. Her name appeared. She had personally logged the intake. At a time she had no memory of being there. Alina sat back slowly. This wasn't just about buried records. It was about erased time. She found the corresponding notebook from that period. A battered thing with water damage along the spine. She flipped through it until she found the date. Several pages had been torn out, cleanly, deliberately. Her own handwriting resumed 3 days later without comment. No note, no explanation. She whispered, "What did you know?" Her phone buzzed again. "UNK Nuwaban, you left breadcrumbs for yourself." She typed back this time, "ELN, why didn't I trust myself?" The reply came slower than usual. "UNK Nuwaban, because you understood the cost of remembering everything." The next morning, Elena went into the precinct. Not officially. She used the side entrance, nodded at faces that didn't question her presence, and made her way to the archives wing. The air there was colder, filtered through decades of bureaucratic neglect. She requested access to one specific locker. The clerk hesitated. "That one's flagged," he said. "IA hold." "I know," Elena replied. He studied her for a moment, then slid the clipboard across. She signed. The locker opened with a reluctant scrape. Inside was a sealed evidence box marked only with a number. No case name, no description. She opened it carefully. Inside was a recorder, older model, analog digital hybrid. Her stomach tightened. She recognized it instantly. It was hers. She picked it up, thumb brushing the worn edge where she used to rest it while thinking. A label was affixed to the back. Her handwriting, DONOTPIYTO Chiefs Quantitative CXT. Elena swallowed. Context was a luxury she no longer had. She pressed play. Her own voice filled the room. Calmer than she remembered being back then. "Personal log," the recording said. "If you're hearing this, it means I made the decision to forget." Elena closed her eyes. The voice continued. "I'm too close. Patterns overlap. The archivist isn't just manipulating records. He's responding to observation. The more I know, the more he adjusts." A pause. "He's not afraid of law enforcement. He's afraid of mirrors." Elena's breath caught. "I'm recording this to protect the investigation," her voice said. "And myself. If I erase parts of my memory trail, I become unpredictable. That's the only advantage left." Another pause. Longer. "If you're listening now, Elena," the recording said gently, "it means the case woke up again. And I trusted you enough to let it." The recorder clicked off. Elena stood there, the hum of the precinct pressing in around her. She hadn't been manipulated. She had chosen this. 7 years ago, she had buried herself in the archive, not to escape the truth, but to survive it. Her phone buzzed one last time. "UNK Namublin, you were always the most dangerous variable." Elena slipped the recorder into her jacket. "Then you should have stopped me," she said softly. She walked out of the archives without looking back. The case wasn't just reopened now. It was personal by design, and this time she wasn't planning to forget. Elena Cross felt it before anyone said a word. The precinct had a rhythm she'd internalized over years. Footsteps, voices, the subtle rise and fall of tension that came with each shift change. That morning, the rhythm was off. Conversations cut short when she passed. A few officers avoided eye contact. Others watched too carefully. She didn't react. Reaction was a confession. She went straight to her desk, powered up her terminal, and logged in as usual. No rush, no secrecy. If internal affairs wanted theater, she wasn't going to give it to them. The first alert appeared less than 30 seconds later. "Assissus SRVW PDNG USERCROC," she smiled faintly. Right on time, Elena opened her email, scanning routine notices until she found what she already knew would be there. FRM from Internal Affairs, Sabi E-Seat Administrative Interview. Mandatory attendance, no time listed. No room number. That meant they'd come to her. She closed the message and leaned back in her chair, folding her hands loosely. Around her, the precinct moved with artificial normalcy. Phones rang. Printers whirred. Someone laughed too loudly near the break room. All noise. I preferred silence. 10 minutes later, she heard the footsteps, measured. Confident, not hurried. 2 people stopped at her desk. She didn't look up immediately. "Detective Cross," a male voice said. Neutral, polished. "We need a word." She finished typing the sentence she was on, saved the file, and then turned. "Morning," she said. "You're early." The man didn't smile. The woman beside him, late 30s, sharp eyes, immaculate posture, studied Elena the way accountants studied numbers they didn't trust. "This won't take long," the woman said. "It never does," Elena replied, standing. "They didn't cuff her. They didn't escort her. That was the first warning." The interview room was smaller than she remembered, or maybe she was. The walls were bare, no clock, no windows. The chair across from her was positioned slightly off center, a subtle imbalance meant to unsettle. Elena adjusted it before sitting. The man introduced himself. The woman didn't. That was the second warning. "Let's start simple," the man said, clicking a pen he didn't need. "Can you explain why you accessed archived materials related to case 09-4-17 last night?" Elena met his gaze calmly. "I'm assigned to cold cases intermittently," she said. "I review closed files regularly." "That case isn't assigned to you," the woman said. "It was," Elena replied. "And closure doesn't erase responsibility." The woman tilted her head slightly. "Responsibility to whom?" Elena didn't answer. Silence filled the room. The man cleared his throat. "We're not accusing you of anything. We're trying to understand pattern deviations." "There it is," Elena said quietly. "Excuse me, pattern deviations," she repeated. "That's IA language for you've noticed something we didn't." The woman smiled thinly. "Or for your repeating behavior that previously caused complications." Elena leaned back. 7 years ago," she said, "I was warned not to dig where answers made people uncomfortable. I listened. That was the complication." The man scribbled something. The woman leaned forward. "Let's talk about last night's access log," she said. "Specifically, the auxiliary terminal." Elena didn't blink. "Which one?" she asked. The woman paused. "Just long enough." Elena continued. "There are 4. Only one still reports partial metadata to the central system." The woman's eyes hardened. "That one," she said. Elena nodded. "Then you already know I didn't alter anything." "We know you restored state," the man said. "Which means you expected me to do worse," Elena replied. Another silence. This one heavier. Finally, the woman spoke. "You've been flagged before, Detective Cross." "Yes," Elena said. "For being right too early." The woman's jaw tightened. "Be careful," she said. "That's not a defense." "No." Elena agreed. "It's a warning." After they released her without suspension. That was the third and most dangerous warning. When IA didn't act, it meant they were watching closely. Elena returned to her desk and found her terminal locked out of 2 systems she'd used that morning. Subtle. Selective. She logged off, gathered her things, and left early. The city outside felt brighter than it should have. Sunlight reflected off wet pavement, forcing her to squint. She put on sunglasses and walked instead of driving. Movement helped her think. Her phone buzzed once. She ignored it. The second buzz came 30 seconds later. She stopped walking. "UNCHEMOWN, they never liked you thinking independently." Elena typed back as she resumed walking. "Element, they don't like mirrors either." The response was immediate. "UNK and Dublin mirrors reflect. Archives remember." She didn't reply. She already knew that. By evening, the pressure had shifted from professional to personal. Her access card failed at her building's side entrance. She used the main door instead, nodding at the super who avoided her eyes. Inside her apartment, nothing was out of place, which meant someone had been careful. Elena moved slowly, checking corners, scanning reflections. Her heart rate stayed even. Fear was useless now. Awareness wasn't. She noticed it in the bathroom mirror. A faint smudge on the glass. Not dirt, a fingerprint. Too high to be hers. She didn't wipe it away. She photographed it. Then she sat at her kitchen table and played the recorder again. Not the whole thing. Just the first 30 seconds. Her own voice steadied her. "If you're hearing this, it means I made the decision to forget." Elena exhaled. The decision hadn't just been about the case. It had been about control. She pulled out the black notebook and turned to a new page. Safgia ards, a CTI, TFIIN she listed them, a fragmented access patterns, redundant memory storage, analog, no single point of truth. She underlined the last one. Then she wrote beneath it IA, TIO BSERVR. She stopped. Observers changed systems. The archivist knew that. Her phone buzzed again. This time she answered. You escalated, she said. No, the voice replied. I adapted. You brought IA into it. They were already there. The voice said calmly, you just forgot how visible you are when you stop hiding from yourself. Elena stood, pacing. You're forcing convergence, she said. That breaks the balance. Yes, the voice agreed. That's the point. For what? Elena asked. A pause. Then, to see which archive survives. Elena stopped, pacing. You're not alone anymore, she said. Another pause longer. That, the voice said carefully, remains to be seen. The line went dead. Elena dreamed. Not images. Files. Folders opening and closing. Labels shifting. Names redacted and restored. A sense of standing in a room where every wall was made of drawers, each one humming softly. She woke before dawn, breath steady but mind sharp. Something had changed. Not outside. Inside her safeguards. She played the recorder one last time. Her past self had anticipated this moment too. There will come a point, the recording said, when forgetting is no longer protection, when observers outnumber variables. Elena whispered, that point is now. She shut the recorder off, put it in her jacket, and made a decision. If IA wanted oversight, she would give them something to oversee. Something undeniable. Something public. She grabbed her keys and headed for the door. The archivist wanted archives. Elena was about to create a new one. One that couldn't be buried. Elena Cross didn't leak information. She curated it. That distinction mattered. At 6:42 a.m., she sat in her car outside a cafe that didn't open until 7, engine off, phone balanced on the steering wheel. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that came from routine rather than peace. Commuters would arrive soon. Noise would return. She needed silence. She opened her secure drive and selected a single file. Not the recordings, not the redirect logs, not the personal recorder. Those were volatile, incomplete, easy to discredit if framed wrong. Instead, she chose something older, boring, administrative, a compliance memo dated 8 years ago, 1 year before Case 09417 officially began. It documented a system vulnerability in municipal record indexing, low priority. Deferred remediation, signed off by 3 departments, including internal affairs. Elena attached a secondary document, a timestamp comparison showing how the vulnerability had been exploited, quietly, precisely, during the window when the archivist first appeared. No accusation, no narrative, just alignment. She encrypted the package and sent it to 3 places simultaneously. A trusted investigative journalist known for document-heavy exposes, a civilian oversight committee mailbox, rarely checked, but legally binding, and, most importantly, an internal audit queue monitored by IA itself. She didn't include her name. She didn't need to. She leaned back and exhaled. Controlled exposure wasn't about revealing everything. It was about changing the environment. A reaction didn't come immediately. It never did. Systems resisted before they adapted. By mid-morning, the precinct felt tighter, quieter. Officers moved with forced normalcy, conversations clipped and shallow. Elena worked openly, avoiding anything that could be flagged as evasive. At 10:17 a.m., her terminal unlocked 2 of the previously restricted systems. At 10:22, one locked again. That was new. Someone was manually intervening. At 10:41, Internal Affairs sent a follow-up message, subject to clarification request. Compliance Memo 2018-44A, no sender listed, no greeting. Just a request for a meeting. Elena didn't respond. She wanted them off balance, not hostile, not defensive. Curious, she stood, grabbed her coat, and left the building. She met the journalist at a public library cafe, glass walls, constant foot traffic, nowhere private enough for intimidation. The journalist, late 40s, sharp eyes dulled slightly by overexposure to truth, didn't ask how Elena got the documents. They never did. What's your angle? The journalist asked quietly. Elena stirred her coffee once. There's a myth, she said, that corruption requires intent, that someone has to decide to be unethical. The journalist waited. Most of the time. Elena continued, it's just neglect. Deferred responsibility. Systems left vulnerable because no one wants to own the fix. And someone exploited that. The journalist said, Wes, is this about a case? Elena met their eyes. It's about an archive. The journalist nodded slowly. Give me time. Elena stood. I already did. By evening, the archivist made contact. This time, it wasn't a call. It was an email. No encryption theatrics, no anonymous routing, just a clean address that shouldn't have existed. From archive. Revision. Subijec you change the temperature lana read it once. Then again, she replied. Ellen, that was the point. The response came slower than usual. Arscheit fist. Exposure accelerates decay. Elni so does pressure. A pause. Then IRC visti, you risked destabilizing the archive. Elena typed carefully. ELN no, I stabilized it. Systems behave differently when observed. This time the delay stretched minutes. Then ARC Civist, you learned that from me. Elena didn't deny it. She leaned back in her chair, watching dusk settle outside her window. Elena, I learned it from surviving you. Another pause. Longer. When the response came, it was different. Less controlled. Arci Visti, you misunderstand the structure. Elena smiled faintly. She had hoped for that. Elena, then explain it. The reply didn't come. Instead, her phone rang. She answered. You exposed a seam, the voice said. No filter this time. Real human. So did you. Elena replied. You forced oversight into a system that can't tolerate it. Good, Elena said. Let it fail fast. That's not how archives work. No, Elena agreed. That's how organisms do. Silence. Then, quieter. You don't know what you've set in motion. Elena's voice softened. I know exactly what I did. I removed your monopoly on memory. The voice hardened. You think Io will protect you. I don't need protection. Elena said. I need witnesses. Another silence. This one felt recalibrated. You always were difficult to categorize. The archivist said. I categorized myself. Elena replied. You just didn't like the label. And what is that? She didn't hesitate. Unindexable. The call ended. The fallout arrived overnight. The journalist published a preliminary piece. No names, no accusations, just systemic alignment knocked to spark questions, enough to trigger mandatory reviews. By morning, the Oversight Committee acknowledged receipt. By noon, Internal Affairs froze all archival modification privileges department-wide. That included whoever had been helping the archivist. Elena watched the alerts scroll across her screen with quiet satisfaction. Then something unexpected happened. Her phone buzzed. Not from the archivist. From an unknown number. She answered. Detective Cross, a woman said. Older. Measured. You don't know me. I know your voice type. Elena replied. Oversight. A pause. Yes, the woman said. Would like to speak with you. Off the record. Elena asked. No, the woman said. On it. Elena closed her eyes briefly. That was faster than expected. When? She asked. Now, the woman replied. Before someone convinces us not to. The meeting took place in a conference room that smelled like old carpet and carcem, according devices visible, but Elena assumed redundancy. 3 committee members, 1 legal observer, no IA. That mattered. They asked about the memo, the vulnerability, the timeline. Elena answered carefully. She didn't speculate. She didn't accuse. She described systems. Someone understood where oversight thinned, she said. They didn't delete evidence. They relocated it. That requires patience, not power. And you believe this is ongoing? One member asked. Elena nodded. Yes. Do you believe this individual is within law enforcement? I believe they understand it intimately. Elena replied. Silence followed. Then the oldest committee member spoke. Detective Cross, she said. You're aware this puts you at personal risk. Elena met her gaze. I've been at risk since I learned to recognize patterns. The woman studied her. Why now? Elena answered honestly, because forgetting stopped working. The meeting ended without resolution. But resolution wasn't the goal, visibility was. Out night, Alina returned home and found her apartment unchanged, except for one thing. Her black notebook sat open on the kitchen table. She hadn't left it there. On the page, written in precise, unfamiliar handwriting, was a single line con alakar ladai xpur, as style le expusur. Alina didn't touch the notebook. She photographed it. Then she sat down across from it, calm settling into something harder. "You're reacting," she said to the empty room, which meant she was winning. Her phone buzzed one last time. "Our vested you forced evolution." Alina typed back, "Ela no. I forced accountability." The reply took longer than any before it. When it came, it was only 6 words. "Ark vista then you should prepare for succession." Alina stared at the screen. Succession wasn't escape, it was continuation. She stood, walked to the window, and looked across at the condemned building. The 3rd floor light was on again, but this time, there were 2 silhouettes. Alina Cross didn't sleep. She lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, lights off, eyes fixed on the faint glow leaking through the blinds. The condemned building across the street stood silent again, its windows dark, as if the silhouettes had never been there at all. That disturbed her more than if they'd stayed. Patterns that appeared once were coincidence. Patterns that repeated were systems. Patterns that vanished after being noticed were adaptive. She rolled onto her side and stared at the ceiling. Succession. The word echoed with uncomfortable clarity. The archivist had never needed to escape consequences. He had only needed to ensure continuity. By morning, the city felt subtly altered. Not louder, not quieter, more organized. Alina noticed it in the small things. The way traffic lights sensed unusually well along her route. How a normally chaotic construction zone had been rerouted overnight without public notice. Information was flowing smoothly. Too smoothly. Someone was tuning the system. At the precinct, the mood had shifted again. Not tension this time, confusion. Bulletins were being updated faster than they could be read. Access permissions changed, then reverted, then changed again. Officers complained quietly about files they'd never requested appearing in their queues. Alina sat at her desk, unmoving, observing. This wasn't sabotage, it was stress testing. Her terminal chimed. Swyes temnatasi archive vel revidibuds del uster anectitidi. She frowned. Cluster wasn't a term the department used. She opened the notice. It listed 5 cases. All unrelated on the surface. Different years. Different crimes. Different cripements. But Alina saw the thread immediately. Each case involved records misalignment. Files that hadn't been deleted, only displaced. Each had been quietly closed. Each investigator had either retired early, transferred suddenly, or withdrawn their complaint. One name appeared twice. Alina Cross. She leaned back slowly. "You didn't just copy him," she murmured. "You scaled him." The first call came from a patrol officer she barely knew. "Detective," he said hesitantly, "I think I found something weird in an old evidence locker." "Define weird," Alina said. "There's a recorder," he replied. "It's labeled with a case I've never heard of. But the voice on it, it keeps referencing files I have worked." Alina closed her eyes briefly. "Don't play it again," she said. "Where are you?" The officer told her. "I'm on my way," she said, "and don't log anything yet." She hung up and stood. The system was no longer waiting for her. It was reaching outward. The evidence room smelled the same as always, cleaning solvent and institutional dust. The officer looked relieved when she arrived, like someone handing off a responsibility they didn't want. He showed her the recorder. Newer model, not hers. She didn't touch it. Instead, she asked, "Did anyone else see this?" "No," he said. "It wasn't in the inventory yesterday." "Good," Alina replied. "That means it wants to be found." The officer frowned. "Aight." Alina met his eyes. "Go take a break," she said gently. "I'll handle this." He didn't argue. She waited until she was alone before pressing play. A voice filled the room, young, calm, confident. "Archive Node 3, it said. "Status check complete. Record displacement successful. Observer reaction pending." Alina's jaw tightened. Node, plurality confirmed. The voice continued. If you are listening to this without authorization, congratulations. You've identified a system inconsistency. That makes you useful. Elena stopped the playback. She didn't need to hear more. This wasn't the archivist. This was someone trained by him, or worse, someone who had trained themselves on his work. By afternoon, the oversight committee called in. The tone had changed. Urgency had replaced caution. We're seeing coordinated anomalies, the chairwoman said. Not just historical. Active. Distributed. How many? Elena asked. We don't know. The woman admitted. That's the problem. Elena nodded. Then you're asking the wrong question, she said. What should we be asking? Elena answered without hesitation. How many observers have stopped observing? Silence followed. You think this is ideological? The chairwoman asked. No, Elena said. It's methodological. She ended the call and stared out her office window. The archivist hadn't created followers. He'd created a framework, one that rewarded invisibility, patience, and intellectual distance. Anyone who believed in the purity of systems over the chaos of people could adopt it, and they'd... That night, Elena did something she hadn't done in years. She went analog. She shut off her phone, unplugged her laptop, and spread paper across her floor. She drew circles, lines, overlaps. At the center, she wrote a ARCHFRCG then she'd ARCHEV process. She marked nodes, cases, people, places. Patterns emerged quickly now, too quickly. The successors weren't hiding. They were testing legitimacy. They wanted to see if the system would reject them, or absorb them. Her phone buzzed despite being off. That shouldn't have been possible. She turned it on slowly. A single message waited. RCHIV. Ravisan's succession was inevitable, she typed back. Elena, you didn't just create successors. You created competition. The reply came after a pause. ARCIV. Ravisan's competition improves resilience. Elena, it also creates fractures. Another pause. Longer. ARCIHIV. Or VSION, you're assuming alignment was ever the goal. Elena stared at the screen. That was new. You didn't want control, she whispered. You wanted evolution. Her phone rang. She answered. You built a philosophy, she said. Not a hierarchy, yes? The archivist replied. His voice sounded distant now. Less centered, and philosophies outlive authors. You underestimated one thing, Elena said. What's that? Me, she replied. A soft sound, not a laugh. Recognition. You were never meant to stop the archive, he said. You were meant to stress it. Elena's grip tightened. You used me. No, he corrected. I trusted you. The call ended. The next morning, the city woke to chaos disguised as order. Multiple departments reported simultaneous data audits. Oversight committees clashed with internal compliance units. Files surfaced without explanation. Others vanished only to reappear elsewhere. The system was eating itself. Elena stood in the middle of it, calm. This was the fracture point. Succession meant divergence, and divergence meant mistakes. She walked into the precinct and pinned a single printed page to the board near her desk. No announcement, no explanation, just a heading UNRAS Elverbribasandbreeze. Beneath it she listed case numbers. Dozens of them, some hers, some not. She waited. Within an hour, 3 detectives stopped pretending not to notice. Within 2, someone added a case number. Within 3, Internal Affairs demanded the board be taken down. Elena refused. Then arrest me, she said calmly. They didn't. By evening, the board was full. Observers had become participants. That was the risk the archivist never accounted for. Succession worked only if belief remained abstract. Elena had made it communal. That night, she returned home and looked once more at the condemned building. This time, all the lights were on. Every floor, every window. No silhouettes. Just illumination. A message. The archive was no longer hiding. It was declaring itself. Elena turned away from the window. Good, she said softly. Now I can finally see who you are. She opened her notebook and wrote a final line beneath the others. SYSTEMS BMO Kien Tomenian PO Pel Rem MBR. She underlined it. Twice. The first fracture didn't look like failure. It looked like disagreement. Elena Cross noticed it in the logs before anyone raised their voice. Case files began surfacing with annotations that didn't match. Redirections contradicted earlier placements. 2 different corrections appeared for the same record. Each internally consistent, each mutually exclusive. That wasn't chaos. That was authorship. Someone else had started writing. She stood at the board in the precinct, arms folded, studying the growing constellation of case numbers. Lines drawn in marker now connected clusters that hadn't existed yesterday. Patterns were no longer converging, they were branching. "You've lost consensus," she murmured. The archive had stopped behaving like a single intelligence. By midday, the consequences became visible. A detective from financial crime stormed into homicide, furious and confused, waving a printout. "This file says my case was rerouted under municipal housing audits in 2016. He snapped. "That's impossible." Elena didn't look surprised. "Who authorized the reroute?" she asked. "No one," he said. "That's the problem." 2 hours later, a different department flagged a similar issue. Same case number, 2 destinations, 2 digital signatures. Neither signature matched a known administrator. Elena closed her eyes briefly. The successors weren't aligned. They were competing for legitimacy. Her phone buzzed. This time, it wasn't the archivist. It was a new address? Node. 90. "Your board is contaminating the archive." Elena read it once, then replied, "Elena, truth spreads when systems weaken." The response came immediately. Node. "IV, you're provoking instability." "Elena, you call it instability. I call it disagreement." A pause. Then noted, "IV consensus is necessary." Elena's jaw tightened. "ELNA consensus is artificial when enforced." The typing indicator appeared, vanished, appeared again. "No, IV, you don't understand succession." Elena leaned back in her chair. "Elena, no. I understand succession perfectly. What you don't understand is inheritance." No reply followed. By evening, the fractures widened. One successor began restoring files another had buried. A third began flagging both as corrupt. Automated processes looped endlessly, correcting each other into paralysis. The archive wasn't failing quietly. It was arguing loudly. Internal affairs noticed. Oversight noticed. The media noticed something was wrong, even if they didn't yet know what. Elena watched it unfold with grim calm. This was inevitable. Any system that defined itself as objective eventually faced the same question: who decides the truth? The archivist called just after midnight. His voice sounded strained. "You pushed too hard," he said. "You said competition improved resilience." Elena replied. "This is competition. This isn't evolution," he snapped. "This is fragmentation." Elena didn't raise her voice. "No," she said. "This is identity." Silence. "You taught them process," she continued, "not purpose. Now they're choosing their own." "They weren't meant to choose," he said quietly. "That's where you failed," Elena replied. "You believed archives should exist without authors. But someone always writes the first entry." Another silence. Longer. "You think this ends with exposure," he said. "With public reckoning?" "No," Elena said. "I think it ends with contradiction. That destroys systems. It humanizes them." He exhaled sharply. "You've turned the archive into a battleground." Elena's gaze drifted to the board behind her, now filled edge to edge. "No," she said. "It was always one. You just controlled the terrain." The line went dead. "Gah. Oh no. Dolls. The breaking point came at 3:12 a.m. An emergency notification lit up precinct screen citywide. Kiratikel data kaifiti. Saseskeskia 3 cold cases, long closed, legally settled, were simultaneously reopened by automated triggers. Warrants were issued, then immediately rescinded. Names surfaced, vanished, resurfaced elsewhere. Families were notified, then told it was a mistake. That was the line. Elena stood so abruptly her chair fell backward. "Shut it down," she said aloud, though no one was listening. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This was harm. She grabbed her coat and headed for the exit. The condemned apartment was no longer dark, but the lights weren't uniform anymore. Some floors glowed harsh white, others flickered. One floor remained dark entirely. Alina studied it like a diagnostic chart. Different nodes, different priorities, different ethics. She understood then what succession truly meant. The archivist hadn't created heirs. He'd created interpreters, and interpreters always disagreed. Her phone rang again. Different voice this time. Female, calm, controlled. "This is Node 2, the voice said. "You've destabilized the system. You destabilized yourselves," Elena replied. "You forced exposure before alignment," the voice said. "Alignment with what?" Elena asked. A pause. "With preservation," the voice replied. Elena's expression hardened. "Preservation without accountability is just hoarding," she said. "We maintain continuity. You maintain power." Silence crackled between them. "You think we'll turn on each other?" the voice said. "You already have," Adao replied. The call ended. By dawn, the archive was visibly broken. Audit trails contradicted. Redirection maps overlapped into nonsense. Oversight froze systems they didn't understand. Aya began issuing internal directives no one fully trusted, and somewhere inside the fracture, successors started leaving messages for each other. Warnings, corrections, accusations. Elena found one embedded in a metadata field. "This isn't what he wanted." Another appeared an hour later. "He's wrong." A third followed. "She's watching us." Elena closed the file. "Yes," she whispered. "I am." She returned to the precinct and erased the board, not because she was done, because the system had reached the next phase. The archive didn't need a spotlight anymore. It needed arbitration, and arbitration required something the archivist had never built into his philosophy: responsibility. Lena sat at her desk and opened a fresh document. She titled Nkichanofqstoy. Then she began writing. Names, dates, decisions. Not hidden, not redirected, anchored. The successors would hate it, and that was how she knew it mattered. That evening, the archivist sent one final message. "Casio, you've turned memory into a weapon." Elena typed back without hesitation. "Elena, no, I turned it back into a burden." The reply never came. Outside, the condemned building went dark, floor by floor, light by light, until only one window remained illuminated. Elena watched it until it, too, went out. The archive was fractured, and fractured systems didn't survive without choosing what they stood for. She closed her notebook and stood. "Your move," she said quietly. The first cost was sleep. Elena Cross hadn't slept properly in days, but now even rest had turned hostile. When she closed her eyes, memories didn't arrive as scenes. They came as fragments. Sounds without context, decisions without timelines. Her own handwriting appearing in places she didn't remember writing. This was what she'd tried to prevent. Memory wasn't a clean archive. It was a living thing, and once disturbed, it didn't organize itself politely. She sat at her kitchen table as dawn crept in, the recorder resting in front of her like a loaded object. She hadn't played it again since the night before. She was afraid of what else she'd told herself. At the precinct, the fracture had consequences, formal ones. She was pulled aside before she reached her desk, guided, not escorted, into a supervisor's office she hadn't been invited into for years. The door closed. "You're being reassigned," the captain said without preamble. Elena nodded once. "Temporary," he added. "Administrative review." "Off me?" Elena said. "Off everything," he replied, rubbing his temples. "You lit a fuse, Cross. Now everyone's scrambling to prove they weren't holding the match." Elena didn't argue. She understood displacement. She'd used it herself. Her badge wasn't taken. Her weapon wasn't surrendered. That meant they still needed her. That also meant she was isolated. The media pressure intensified. The journalist published a second piece. Still careful, still document heavy. But this time it mentioned systemic record redirection explicitly. Not names, not faces, just damage. Phones rang unanswered. Oversight committees issued statements that said nothing. Internal affairs went silent, which was never a good sign. Alina watched it unfold from the outside now, observer again, only this time the distance hurt. Now, the second cost unexpectedly. Her sister called. They didn't speak often. Silence had settled between them years ago, quietly, without a clear cause. Elena had always assumed it was distance, different lives. You okay? Her sister asked, voice tentative. Elena hesitated. That alone was answer enough. I don't know, she said honestly. There was a pause on the line. I saw your name, her sister said. Not in the articles. In the way people talk. Alina closed her eyes. I tried to keep you out of it, she said. I know, her sister replied. That's kind of the problem, Alina. You always do. The line went quiet. Then, softly. You don't remember everything you protect us from. The call ended gently, but it left a bruise. Aunt Alina found the recorder again. Not the first message. The next one. Her own voice, older but not yet worn down. Memory log, continuation, it said. If this is being accessed, safeguards are failing. Elena swallowed. I need to acknowledge something. The recording continued. I'm not just erasing trails. I'm erasing myself in pieces. A pause. This will cost me relationships. Continuity. Trust. Another pause. But it's preferable to becoming predictable. Alina felt something twist in her chest. She'd known. She'd chosen this knowing the cost. The recording ended. She sat in silence long after. The third cost came from the archive itself, not as a threat, as an offering. A message appeared on her phone. No sender, no warning. A file she hesitated before opening it. Inside was a timeline. Her timeline, dates she didn't remember. Meetings she didn't recall attending. Decisions she didn't consciously remember making, but recognized instantly as her own. One entry stood out. Decision node removed self from successor eligibility. Alina stared at the words. She hadn't just fragmented her memory to evade the archivist. She had deliberately made herself incapable of inheriting the system. Not a safeguard. A refusal. Her phone buzzed again. You disqualified yourself. Elena typed back slowly. And I chose responsibility over control. The response came after a delay. That choice weakens you. Alina stood and walked to the window. No, she said aloud. It anchors me. She didn't reply. The pressure became physical after that. Headaches that arrived without warning. A tightness in her chest when she walked past familiar places that felt unfamiliar. Moments where she reached for something, keys, words, names, and found absence instead. This was the real damage. Not public scrutiny. Not professional risk. But the realization that some parts of herself were gone permanently, and she had done it on purpose. Alina returned to praising one last time that week, not to work, but to collect her things. Cardboard box, old commendations she'd never displayed, a framed photo she didn't remember taking. She paused at the board she had erased. Only faint marker shadows remained. Good. Some things should leave residue. As she turned to leave, a junior detective stopped her. Detective Cross, he said quietly. I added one of those case numbers. Alina looked at him. Why? She asked. He swallowed. Because it never sat right. And when you put it up there, it felt like permission. Alina nodded once. That permission comes with weight, she said. Are you ready for that? He didn't answer immediately. Then, I think I already am, she left without another word. All night, the condemned building stayed dark. No lights, no signals. The archive was quiet. Too quiet. Elena sat at her table and opened her notebook to the last page. She wrote Remembembi costs some farmers but I did causes less esta lng. She closed the notebook. For the first time in weeks, she turned off the light and lay down. Sleep didn't come easily, but when it did, it stayed. And when she woke, she knew one thing with absolute clarity: the archive could fracture. It could evolve. It could even survive. But it could no longer hide behind her absence. The cost had been paid. and the reckoning was next. The request didn't come with a threat. That was how Alina Cross knew it was real. No leverage, no implied consequences, no pressure language dressed up as concern, just a message delivered through channels that no longer officially existed. SUBGCT's arbitration request to ethics system integrity failure REQIRD. Independent determination, no sender, no signature, just expectation. Alina read it once, then closed her laptop. She had known this moment was coming the instant the archive fractured. Systems without hierarchy always reached for an external authority when internal consensus collapsed. They didn't want her expertise. They wanted her absence of allegiance. The meeting took place in a building Alina had never entered before, federal in function, municipal in disguise. No signage, no windows at street level, the kind of place designed to look forgettable on purpose. Inside, the room was circular. That detail mattered. No head of the table, no visual dominance. Just chairs arranged evenly, each occupied by someone who represented a different failure point in the system. Oversight, internal compliance, legal review, infrastructure security, data ethics. And Alina, no badge, no recorder, no protection. She sat anyway. The chairwoman spoke first. "We're not here to assign blame," she said. Alina met her eyes calmly. "Then you're already lying to yourselves," she replied. No one objected. "Good. They laid it out clinically. Multiple successor nodes had been identified, some cooperative, some hostile, some silent, all operating under the same foundational logic: preserve records through redirection, not deletion. The problem wasn't intent. The problem was conflict. Nodes overrode each other. Systems stalled. Automated processes contradicted human oversight. Legal consequences had begun cascading. "You want arbitration?" Alina said. "But you don't want enforcement." The chairwoman nodded. "We don't know how to enforce something that doesn't officially exist." Alina folded her hands. "Then stop pretending this is a technical problem." A man across from her frowned. "What else would it be?" Alina answered without hesitation. "It's philosophical." Silence followed. They showed her a proposal, a containment plan. The archive would be formalized, codified, brought under a single oversight authority. The successors would be offered amnesty in exchange for compliance. The archivist, if located, would be prosecuted quietly. The system would survive, sanitized. Alina read the document slowly. Then she slid it back across the table. "This fails," she said. "Why?" the chairwoman asked. "Because it rewards the illusion that this was ever about control," Alina replied. "It wasn't. It was about certainty." She leaned forward. "You can't govern certainty. You can only choose how much uncertainty you're willing to tolerate." A man from legal cleared his throat. "People were harmed." "Yes," Alina said. "And they will be harmed again if you pretend the harm was accidental." The room shifted. They showed her a second option. Dissolution. Shut everything down. Purge redirection tools. Lock records permanently. Prosecute anyone linked to the system. Declare the archive corrupt and erase it from institutional memory. Alina shook her head. "That's denial," she said. "You can't erase a method once it's been learned." "So, what are you suggesting?" the chairwoman asked. Alina sat back. "Responsibility," she said, distributed. Document and they listened now. Really listened. Alina spoke slowly. No more hidden nodes. No anonymous authority. Every redirection logged publicly within the system. Every intervention attributed to a human being who signs their name and accepts consequence. That would paralyze operations. Someone objected. "Yes," Alina replied. "At first. And after. After, only actions worth standing behind will survive." Silence again. Different this time. Heavy? The chairwoman spoke carefully. "You're proposing radical transparency?" "No," Alina corrected. "I'm proposing visible burden." She stood. Archives became dangerous when memory stopped costing anything. When people could move truth without touching it. That's what fractured the system. She looked around the room. "You want arbitration. Here it is. She placed a single sheet of paper on the table. At the top, handwritten principles of recordintr vitine beneath it, 3 lines. 1. No redirection without attribution. 2. No preservation without accountability. 3. No system without witnesses. This isn't policy, Alina said. It's gravity. Ignore it, and the system collapses again. The chairwoman studied the page. This makes you center, she said. Alina shook her head. No, she replied. It removes the need for anyone like me ever again. That landed. They asked one final question. What about the successors? The legal observer asked. Those who refuse. Alina didn't hesitate. They expose themselves, she said, because secrecy no longer protects them. When Alina left the building, the city felt unchanged. That was how she knew the decision hadn't been made yet. Real change lagged. She walked for nearly an hour, phone silent, mind steady. She didn't expect relief. She expected resistance. That was fine. At home, she found a message waiting. From the archivist. Shorter than ever. RHIV, Eve Rezai, you've chosen decay. Elena typed back calmly. ELEI, no, I chose consequence. The reply came after a long delay. ARCHIV Ervesin, they won't maintain it. Elena stared at the screen, then replied ELELA, they won't have a choice. The typing indicator appeared, stopped, appeared again, then vanished permanently. No goodbye, no warning, just absence. At night, Elena stood at her window. The condemned building was dark. It had been dark for days now. No signals, no silhouettes, no archive hiding in plain sight. She knew better than to believe that meant it was gone. Systems didn't disappear. They adapted, or were replaced. But for the first time since the voicemail at 2:17 a.m., Elena felt something close to resolution. Not victory, responsibility. She opened her notebook and wrote one last entry. R.I. Kratawas, not Katwairil. ITS Agrayement Tobecian. She closed the notebook. Tomorrow the system would respond, and whatever it chose, it would no longer be invisible. The announcement didn't come with a press conference. There were no podiums, no prepared statements, no faces put forward to absorb blame. That alone told Elena the decision had gone through. Real change avoided cameras. At 7:03 a.m., a new portal went live. Unbranded. Uncelebrated. Functional. Pubalai Ricard INTR Vako Laub. The name was intentionally dull. The content was not. Elena first noticed it when her phone began vibrating nonstop. Not calls, not messages, but notifications. Automated alerts from systems she hadn't had access to in weeks. The archive was surfacing. Not wholesale. Not recklessly. Selectively. Each entry followed the same structure. Original record location, a redirection history, a human authorizations attached, justification provided, oversight responses logged in real time, no narrative, no spin, just traceable truth. Elena sat at her kitchen table scrolling slowly. There it was. Case 09417. Her case. The archivist's origin. Every movement of the file was mapped. What had been hidden when, and by whom? The vulnerability memo she'd leaked sat at the top, no longer anonymous. Her name appeared beside it. Not as an accusation. As authorship. She felt the weight of it settle into her chest. This was the cost she'd accepted. By noon, the impact was unavoidable. Journalists didn't need sources anymore. Lawyers didn't need subpoenas. Activists didn't need whistleblowers. The system had become self-evident. Departments issued statements acknowledging historical inconsistencies. Oversight bodies announced full cooperation. Internal Affairs released a single sentence confirming an ongoing integrity review. None of it mattered. The public didn't need interpretation. They had receipts. Elena left her apartment and walked through the city. People didn't recognize her. That was fine. But they felt something shifts. She heard it in conversations, saw it in the way phones were held just a little higher, screens checked just a little longer. Trust didn't return, but blind faith died.
That was enough.
The first successor fell that afternoon. Not arrested, exposed. A Node IV message appeared briefly on the public log, an unauthorized redirection flagged and attributed. The justification field was empty. Within hours, legal filings surfaced. Prior cases reopened. Employment histories scrutinized. The archive no longer protected its interpreters. It demanded they stand behind their choices. Some couldn't. Others tried to justify themselves publicly. Those explanations aged badly within minutes. At dusk, Elena received one final message, not encrypted, not hidden postaputly, then removed within seconds, but not before it was captured. ARCHIY. Revisign, you turned a living system into a spectacle. Elena didn't reply online. She replied privately. EELNA, no, I turned it into a witness. The response came slower than ever. RCIVE, Reviso and witnesses distort. Elena typed one final time, ELN only when they're afraid. There was no reply, no disappearance notification, no silence signal. Just nothing. And this time the nothing felt earned. Note. Elena returned home and opened the recorder one last time, not to listen, to erase it. She didn't smash it, didn't dramatize the act. She recorded over it. Her voice steady, unguarded. This archive is now public, she said. No contingencies required. She powered it down and placed it in a drawer. Some tools were only meant for closed systems. Weeks passed. The public archive stabilized, not clean, not perfect, but visible. Some records stayed buried, not by malice, but by irrelevance. Others resurfaced with consequences that took time to unfold. Elena watched from a distance. She wasn't asked to consult. She wasn't invited to panels. That was the point. The system didn't need a guardian anymore. It needed participation. On a quiet evening, Elena stood once more at her window. The condemned building across the street was being renovated. Scaffolding wrapped its frame. Lights burned brightly, temporary and exposed. No secrets, no shadows. She allowed herself a small exhale. Her phone buzzed. Not a message, a notification. Puppy like Rocco IINTR vent LOG. NEWNTRI. She didn't open it immediately. She didn't need to. She already knew what it meant. The archive was no longer something done to people. It was something done with witnesses. Elena closed the blinds, turned off the light, and sat down at her table. She opened her notebook to a blank page. Then, after a long pause, she wrote THDOASETI UDEDKDEPR. ITNEDCES. She closed the notebook. For the first time since that voicemail at 2:17 a.m., the night felt quiet. Not empty. Honest. And somewhere in that honesty, the case finally rested. Some cases end with arrests. Others end with answers. But the most dangerous ones end with visibility. Because once the truth is seen, it can't be archived, redirected, or buried again. Detective Elena Cross didn't shut down a system. She exposed it to the light and made sure it would never belong to just one mind again. If this story stayed with you, if the silence between the answers felt heavier than the answers themselves, then you already understand what Midnight Casefiles is about. These aren't stories about heroes. They're about consequences, about memory, about what happens when the past refuses to stay quiet. Subscribe for more cases that don't fade when the credits roll. Because some files are never truly closed. They're just waiting for someone willing to look. Good night.